Good evening, kids, and welcome to Exam Analysis by Endeavour. Hope all of your exams have gone well and hope you have great expectations from them. Today was the second day, or let's say the second attempt of the NPAT exam. And the paper today was very similar in terms of pattern and question types when compared to yesterday's paper. So what we're going to do here is that in today's session, we're going to discuss the question types and the difficulty level of different sections or different subjects in the paper, right? But before we start, I just want to discuss a couple of things about the exam, the overall interface and the technical issues that a couple of students faced. So a few of our students have complained or they have spoken about slight glitches or slight lag in the interface of the exam, wherein in the DI section, the diagram wasn't really appearing on the spot. So after you click the question, it would take a few seconds for the diagram to load. Even in the verbal section, after clicking on the next question, the options would appear first and then the question. On an average, it was taking about 4 or 5 seconds for questions to appear. Not every question, but let's say every 4th or 5th question, the glitch came up. Of course, this was not something that was faced by every student, only a couple of them. So there's no saying if this was really an interface problem from the exam side or really an internet issue. But on the safe side, be prepared, be mentally prepared for something like this. It shouldn't really throw you off guard in terms of the time management because it was just a couple of seconds of lag. But yes, there is also a helpline number provided to all of the students. So in case you do face some really huge issue, which chances are really less, but in case you do, feel free to call on the helpline immediately and you will get a response. That is something that we have been told by multiple students, that the helpline is quite prompt in responding to any kind of student issues. Okay, so let's move on with the verbal section. Before that, I'm just going to go through a couple of things here. The exam time remained the same, 3:30 to 5:30. All of the instructions remained the same as before. There was no negative marking as usual, and there was 1 mark for each right answer. Right? There was also no sectional time limit in the sense that you did not have to spend only a particular amount of time on each section. You were free to manage your own time accordingly. But yes, you could not move between sections or you could not switch between sections in the sense that the sections had to be attempted in a particular order, which was English, then reasoning, and then quants. And only after you finish the English section and you submitted that section would you be able to move on to the next section, which was reasoning, submit that, and then move on to the third section, which was maths or quants. So this was a slight difference from previous year's pattern, but the same system was seen in yesterday's paper as in today's paper, and obviously it's going to be expected in tomorrow's paper as well. So let's start with discussing or analyzing how the English section was in the exam. The number of questions in the English section were 40, right, as usual, with a total score of 40. Now here you can see there's a column of ideal time. So this is what we suggest students, that on the English section, you should ideally spend 25 to 30 minutes, right? That is more than enough to be able to attempt all of the questions in the English section, more than enough time. The RCs, the grammar, the vocab, everything will get done in a maximum of 30 minutes. Do not take more time than that. This is for students who are attempting the exam tomorrow. Make sure you don't take more time than 30 minutes for your English section, because then you might be scavenging or you might be in a real hurry in your quants and in your reasoning section. You might not be able to give full focus there, right? So 30 minutes should be sufficient. Talking about the types of questions that came in the paper, let's start with vocabulary. There were around 3 to 5 questions of vocabulary in today's paper. So vocab-based questions were of 2 types. First, there were 3 questions on idioms, right? Idioms such as cold feet or break the bread or bend over backwards. These were the idioms that were seen in today's paper. And the question asked you the meaning of the idiom, right? They were quite easy. If you have studied idioms well, then this was quite an easy to moderate type of question to answer. The other questions, the other vocabulary questions came in the form of fill in the blanks, right? So you had 2 to 3 vocab questions on fill in the blanks, wherein a sentence was given and you had a blank and you had to fill it with the appropriate vocab word. This also, our students have said that they were quite easy in terms of answering. The vocabulary was not very difficult, not very high level. So a good amount or a fair amount of vocabulary knowledge should get you through this section also. Then coming to RCs. Now there were 3 RCs as usual. In previous year papers also, we have seen that there have been 3 RCs with 5 questions each. The same pattern was followed this year. Out of those 3 RCs, so every RC was somewhere between 450 to 500 words, right? The RCs, the types of questions that were seen in the RCs were mainly inference-based questions and main idea-based questions. So there were a lot of inference and accept type of questions in each and every section or in each and every RC, right? But out of the 3 RCs, it has been noticed that 2 of them were of easy to moderate level, but 1 of them was quite difficult, right? And this was the same thing that was seen in yesterday's paper as well. In yesterday's paper also, out of the 3 RCs, 1 was very difficult and 2 of them were quite easy or moderate. And that was the same thing that was seen today. So there's a good chance that you can expect that in tomorrow's paper as well, right? RCs also included questions on tone, on source of the passage, right? And a couple of vocab-based questions and a couple of reference to context questions, in the sense that they asked questions about what does the author mean by certain words or certain sentences in the last paragraph or the first paragraph of the passage. Now coming to sentence rearrangement, or what we ideally called parajumbles. There were 5 parajumbles in the paper. Each of them had 5 statements each, or 5 sentences each. So you had A, B, C, D, E. You obviously had options and you had to arrange them based on the options. These were also quite easy, the parajumbles. Let's say easy to moderate. Out of the 5, 4 of them were very easy. 1 of them was a little confusing, right? But not very difficult as such, moderate difficulty level. Then we had fill in the blanks. Now in fill in the blanks, as I discussed, that 2 or 3 fill in the blanks were based on vocabulary and all of the remaining were based on grammar. So in terms of grammar, you were tested on topics such as tenses, conjunctions, and prepositions. These 3 were the most tested topics in your fill in the blanks. Again, you had a sentence, a blank was given and you had to fill it with the appropriate, let's say, preposition or conjunction. Fill in the blanks were also of a moderate level. I won't say very, very easy, but also not very difficult. A moderate level difficulty was seen in the FIBs. Now coming to grammar or spot the error. Error detection questions. There were 5 in the paper. Okay, the sentence was divided into parts, divided into multiple parts, and you had to find or spot the error in either of the parts. This, we have been told, that was a little difficult. Actually, it was quite difficult. This was one of the difficult parts of an otherwise easy to moderate level paper. They were a little confusing. Some questions, some error questions were in terms of prepositions and articles and gerunds and infinitives, right? So overall, if I were to talk about the verbal section, I wouldn't say that it was very difficult. Apart from 1 RC and the spot the error type of questions, most of the paper was easy to moderate, right? So you should be able to easily complete the paper within 30 minutes, right? But in terms of strategy, in terms of which part to attempt first and which part to leave for the end, I would suggest that start with the easier ones. Now you know that vocabulary and parajumbles, FIB, these are easier questions. So start with them first. In terms of RC, as I said, that the pattern suggests that out of the 3 RCs, you're going to have 2 easy RCs and 1 difficult RC, right? And you will be able to judge which RC is difficult based on the types of questions, the length of the options, the length of the passage, and the difficulty in terms of the language, right? So based on these parameters or these factors, you should easily be able to judge out of the three which one is a tougher RC. And I would suggest that leave that RC to the end. Do that right at the end. And this has to be a strategy in general for every time-based exam that you take, that always aim for the easier stuff first, because what happens is that when you start with the difficult one, it might throw your time management a little off guard, right? It might throw you a little off in terms of timing, because you will end up taking more time than expected on the difficult part. And then you will be a little panicky. It also sets the mood for the rest of the paper. Right? And now that you know that there's just one difficult RC and most of the paper is easy to moderate, then why not aim that part first and then move to the RC right at the end, right? So this should be your strategy for tomorrow's paper. All of you who have a reattempt tomorrow, or you who are giving tomorrow's slot, aim for this strategy. Aim for 30 minutes maximum, and 30 minutes is the upper limit. Ideally, within 25 to 27 minutes, you should be able to finish the verbal section. Of course, goes without saying that answer all of the questions, because there's no negative marking. So even questions which are difficult or questions you're not able to get the answer to, go ahead and answer all of them, right? I hope this clears your understanding of the verbal section, the analysis of today's paper. Overall, do not worry, the verbal section is quite moderate, and if you've studied well, you should be able to get great marks in it. A good amount of attempt, and when I mean attempt, I mean attempts that you know. So out of 40 questions, you should easily be able to solve 32 or 33 questions based on your studies. The remaining, say 7 or 8 might be a little tricky or difficult, wherein you might be confused with the option. Nevertheless, answer them. But I would say that 32, 33 questions is quite possible to solve on your own, okay? So this ends the verbal section or the verbal analysis of the paper. Now I'm going to hand over to our quants faculty, quants and DI faculty. So he is going to run you through the reasoning and the quant section. But of course, before I finish off, another thing, slight thing to know, is that in the reasoning section, you have a tiny part of verbal reasoning, right? A tiny part of verbal reasoning, and that was what was seen in today's paper as well. You had questions on statement assumptions and conclusions, wherein you were given a particular statement and you were given 2 assumptions or 2 conclusions, and you had to choose which of the following conclusions or assumptions can be derived or they follow the statement, right? So you had around 2 questions of this type, and they were also not very difficult questions, right? Moderate difficulty, use a little bit of logic and you would be able to get your answer to that as well. In syllogisms, you had around 3 or 4 questions. They were of easy level. Difficulty level was quite easy. You could just look at the statements and make the Venn diagrams in your head and you would be good to go. So all in all, even in the reasoning section, the verbal part of it, or what we call the verbal reasoning, was quite easy. Okay, you can say that it was moderate and you should be able to solve that very well. So let's move on now to another detailed analysis of the reasoning and the quant section. I'm going to hand over to another faculty, Ankur sir, and he's going to take it from there. So let's take 30 seconds for transition.
Okay. Thank you, Manal ma'am. Coming to the reasoning section, reasoning was the second section in the NPAT paper. Uh, the total number of questions in the reasoning section is 40, and there is no sectional time limit. So, as stated at the beginning of the analysis, an optimal time suggested for this particular section is around 40 minutes. Right? With 40 minutes, you should be able to maximize your score in this particular section. Okay. Overall, from an analysis perspective, this section was pretty similar to the reasoning section of day one, right? So whatever was the difficulty level, the distribution across the topics, we have found it to be very similar to the day one, right? Let's have a in detailed look at the reasoning section. Uh, DI, data interpretation. Uh, Yesterday also, DI comprised of around 10 questions. Today also, DI had 10 questions. Just that yesterday there were 2 sets. Today, DI had 3 sets. One set on pie chart, one set on tables, and one set on line graph. Okay. So the pie chart set, students have reported it to be on the easier side, whereas the set on the table and line graph, students found it a little bit on the calculative side. Okay. Uh, there were around 4 odd questions on data sufficiency, similar to what it was yesterday. And these questions were on topics related to blood relation arrangement and number systems. So they were again on the easy side. Syllogism, something Manal ma'am already talked about, around 4 odd questions which were on the easy side. There were around 4 odd questions on mathematical operations, again very similar to yesterday. Uh, two of these questions were on inequalities. Again, very easy to moderate difficulty level questions. Uh, Similar to yesterday, again, 5 questions were there on decision making, which we also refer to as selection criteria, which were again on the easy side. 2 questions on verbal reasoning, which again Manal ma'am had talked about, were on the easy to moderate side. 3 to 4 questions were on the arithmetic reasoning, which were again on the easy side. Around 6 to 7 miscellaneous questions from topics related to arrangement, blood relation, and visual reasoning. Visual reasoning had 4 questions similar to yesterday. 3 questions students have reported to be on the easy side. One was on the slightly difficult side. One of the questions was also based on dice over here in the visual reasoning, right? So overall, reasoning appeared to be a moderate, difficulty level section. With 40 minutes in this section, students could have made optimal utilization and could maximized their score in this particular section. Reasoning was very similar to the day one. So students can expect a similar kind of a section in tomorrow's paper. Students who are attempting tomorrow can primarily target topics like data sufficiency, syllogisms, mathematical operations, decision making, visual reasoning, arithmetic reasoning, right? So questions on these topics have been found to be on the easier side in the first 2 days. So, students can target these topics if the paper, appears to be similar to the first and the second day, right? Now let's move to the next section, which is the quant section. So, quant and quantitative and numerical ability had totally 40 questions. A suggested time for this particular section was around 35 minutes. Of all the 3 sections, this is definitely a section which appeared to be slightly on the difficult side. Okay. Looking at the in detailed analysis of this particular section, numbers had around 2 questions. One of the questions was based on HCF and LCM, which students, found it a little bit on the difficult side. There were around 4 odd questions on functions, very similar to yesterday's analysis. There was a lot of, usage of composite functions and inverse functions in these questions. questions were moderate to difficult level questions, right? There were 4 questions on statistics, again very similar to day one, and students were asked to find the mean, median, standard deviation, and variance. These questions were on the easy to moderate difficulty side. Set theory again had 4 questions based on Venn diagrams, very similar to yesterday, and the questions were also very easy, right? Progressions again had 3 to 4 questions similar to day one, based on arithmetic progression and geometric progression. Uh, these questions were a mix of moderate and difficult questions. Trigonometry again had 3 to 4 questions, which students have found to be a little bit calculative, and hence, students, the difficulty level is, moderate to difficult. Profit overall, from a percentage perspective, if you look at the question based on percentage and the application of percentage, which is profit and loss and simple interest and compound risk, there were around 5 to 6 questions in this particular section. Again, very similar to day one. Questions were slightly on the calculative side. SICI basically had a question related to installment, which was again very similar to what we observed on day one, right? These questions overall in the percentage section, in the percentage topic, were moderate to difficult questions. Probability again had 1 to 2 questions, which were easy to moderate. There was 1 question on height and distance in geometry, which was on the easy side. Board mass, similar to day one, had around 3 odd questions. Most of them were easy. One of the questions has been reported to be a little on the lengthier side. And then, there were 6 to 7 questions on other topics like ratio, proportion, and quadratic equations, which were of the moderate difficulty level, right? Overall, from, the entire sectional perspective, the entire section appeared to be very similar to how it was on the day one, in terms of the difficulty level as well as the topic-wise distribution, right? So you can expect a similar distribution of topics in tomorrow's paper, and the difficulty level may also be similar. So if that is the case, which are the topics that students can target? Students can target questions based on the topics of statistics, set theory, probability, geometry, board mass, right? So these are the topics which you can target for tomorrow's paper, in case the paper appears to be very similar to the day one and day two, right? All said and done, please be prepared for any surprises or any change in the difficulty level or the distribution of questions, right? Now, let's have a look at the overall analysis of the paper, right? So, first section was the English section, wherein, as we have suggested, our optimal time that students should devote to the section is around 25 minutes, and which students can look at, attempting 34 plus questions, and a good score in this section would be around 29 plus, right? Reasoning, students can devote around 40 minutes and can target attempting 33 plus questions with a score of 28 plus, right? Quantitative and numerical ability, as I highlighted earlier, is among the relatively difficult sections among the 3 sections, wherein your question selection and time management become even more important, right? So you can look at allocating around 35 remaining minutes of your paper in this particular section, and look at attempting around 18 plus questions with a score of 16 plus, which should give you an overall score of 73 plus, which should be good enough to get you a seat for BBA at NMIMS Mumbai, and also your BSc Finance at NMIMS Mumbai, right? So this was the analysis of day 2 NPAT from our side, right? All the best to the students who are appearing for the exam tomorrow. Thank you.